Good morning. We are going to do our second set of tiles. Remember, we need to wedge our clay, rolling it forward, not squishing it. You don't want to make a pancake. You're working towards a round form that has all the air bubbles removed. In order to put it through the slab roller, remember we need to flatten it out a little bit. We don't want to try and put a round ball through. You need it more than 5 inches wide, otherwise your tile required, you need 4 inches of width for your tile. If you don't have this more than wide enough, you may end up not having a wide enough tile. So I put that against the cloth and the rollers. Make sure that you've measured this, these gears to 3/8 of an inch. We did this on Friday, so you'll remember that. Roll it through, making sure the fabric is all going through nicely and nothing's binding up. If anything starts to go wrong, remember, just stop, bring the roller up, and fix it that way. Don't try and force it through or continue to go if something goes wrong, okay? Now we have our slab of clay that's come out. We want to make sure to use one of our tools, our metal rib, to remove this texture of the canvas on both the front. I do a flat flip. I don't bend the clay like that. I do a flat flip. I grab it by the edges and flip it over so the clay remains nice and flat. We take that texture out. Then we're going to use a ruler. Sorry, forgot one step here. I want you to find a board or something and put some plastic wrap underneath your clay, okay? Keeping it nice and flat. The next thing I'm going to do is use my ruler to get a 4-inch square. Yes, I will show you how to do that again. Go through that. We make one baseline as low as we can. Make sure it's at least 8 inches long. We cut one flat edge. We measure 4 inches. Make a line, 4 inches, make a line, and then we'll cut our top line. This way we know that these are parallel and 4 inches apart. Now we will measure 8 inches long. We put a line at this end at 4 inches and at 8. And again at the top, we'll be doing the same thing. We'll need to cut our edge here first, so we have a reference point to measure from. 4 and 8 inches again. Then I can cut off this end and cut our 2 tiles, okay? We'll spend some time smoothing this edge. The tile that we don't need can be wrapped up, put to the side. We'll clean up our edges. And if I'm going to do subtractive method, I want to have something that's going to either carve repetitive patterns into my tile. This one, I found this little pointed stamp, and if I did this randomly without measuring, it wouldn't be as effective because it's more of a geometric design. So I measured out a half inch grid on my tile, and then I carefully show you how I did this. I measured out a half inch grid. I'm just going to do 1 or 2 on here so you can see how I did it. You can measure this way, mark 1/2 inches. Keep my tool clean. Then measure one-half inches. Make the grid. I would do that across the top as well. For the sake of time, I'm not going to measure all of this. You get the point here. You want them all to be consistent. And then what I'll do is experiment on a scrap piece of tile, maybe the tile that I cut off the edges of my tiles. Play with how deep it goes if I just push straight down and come up. But then what happens if I roll it around a little bit? I get a little more interesting kind of texture in there. So what I'm going to do is go into my squares, and I'm going to pull my shape all the way to my grid lines. I could do alternating, but with a geometric stamp, if I did it randomly, then I get an entirely different feel, which is okay, but I like this repetitive texture on this tile. The scratch marks from the needle tool are one thing that I do not want you to leave. So you're not done here. I've covered this with my preferred texture, and then I'm going to add more dots in the corners. I want these tiles, these subtractive methods, I'd like them to all be really thoroughly carved, where almost none of the flat surface is remaining when you're done. So I just keep going. This is repetition and variation. It becomes much more interesting when you start adding more and more details to this. If I was to do an organic form, I could do something that's more free-flowing. Maybe it's inspired by water or muscle or something of that nature. And I would find a tool that does not, we don't want to use our needle tool on this, okay? I don't want to see any needle tool marks on any of the subtractive tiles. If you use them for grid marks, please go over them with something else. But if I was going to do a subtractive method, say with this tool, I would go in far enough. These need to be at least half the depth of the tile. You cannot keep it really shallow. You won't get a good texture that way. So if you're going in with something like this, make sure that you're going in nice and deep. You see how I'm getting these ripping marks here in my clay? You can choose to keep them if they're part of the look that you want, or you can go over those with either your finger or with a damp sponge. I'm not really enjoying that texture much, but what if I use just my fingers to push in? You can use just about anything for a subtractive tile. Some of the most simple marks, oh, see how it's erasing? I have to go in underneath and lift that clay up in order to get a good texture coming in. almost any texture can work, any tool can work for stamping and pushing into the clay, but you have to plan it out, and you need to make sure that you do enough of them, build them, layer them, so that they become more interesting like this does.